Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the story about Naruto. What if Naruto has steel release? Part 2. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please do support for more awesome content and also hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And also support the creator of this fanfic. I have created many playlists, check it out in the channel. So let's start the video. Very well then, it looks like we can now field 2 full teams. Kakashi, I'd like you to take Uchiha Sasuke, Hyuga Hinata, and Inuzuka Kiba for your team. The Inuzuka pack mentality will be a good lesson in teamwork for the Uchiha and make sure that the Hyuga girl continues to build her confidence. Seeing the masked Jounin nod, he turned to Yuhi Kurenai. Kurenai, your team will be Aburame Shino, Haruno Sakura, and Uzumaki Naruto. Does anyone have any problems with the team assignments? Seeing no objections, the Hokage moved to end the meeting. The meeting is over then, thank you all for your hard work. Iruka, please file the necessary paperwork and see to it that Uzumaki Naruto gets a hit I8 in time for tomorrow. Anko, Kurenai, come with me please. Striding purposefully out of the conference room and upstairs to the Hokage office, Sarutobi waited until the 2 female Jounin had followed him in and seated themselves, then dismissed his guard and activated his office's privacy seals before seating himself. Clasping his fingers together and putting them against his chin contemplatively, he mentally sorted through the things that needed to be covered in the coming conversation. He had chosen Kurenai to be Naruto's Jounin instructor because, as one of the very rare shinobi who had risen from a civilian background to elite Jounin status, she had not lost any family members to the Kyuubi's attack. Her Chunin team had also been on extended assignment outside Konoha when the attack occurred. The woman had never displayed any negative feelings towards Naruto, but he needed to be sure. First, Kurenai-san, I'd like you to tell me what you know about Uzumaki Naruto. I don't really know that much about him, beyond what's commonly known. Please indulge me. Well, I know he's an orphan, and no one knows who his parents are. He used to be a holy terror around town with the pranks he pulled. Though I have to say, some of the more elaborate ones were quite interesting, from a planning and execution viewpoint. Someone attacked him 2 or 3 years ago, I heard he lost an eye and spent some time in the hospital. After that I don't recall seeing him around the village much at all. I'm actually somewhat surprised he managed to beat Mizuki at all, let alone one-eyed. How did he manage to do that, Anko? It was quite a fight, Hokage-sama, the trench-coated ninja exhibitionist replied. The kid set up a double explosive tag trap where the first explosion would also drop the second tag down on a wire and modified that one to have a longer delay. He got Mizuki to chase him to where he'd set the trap up, and the first one exploded when the bastard was by the tree it was stuck on. Mizuki managed to pull back and avoid any real damage though. Sarutobi nodded. Explosive tags were costly to produce and were no more than nuisances to shinobi of mid-chunin rank or higher. They were typically sold to starry-eyed genin for their visual impact, who did not yet realize just how difficult it was to cause any major injuries to seasoned ninja with tags. That was just the first part of Naruto's trap though. He set up a bunshin to charge through the explosive smoke while he circled around and attacked Mizuki from the back. Mizuki saw through bunshin and turned just in time to see the tag that had dropped on a wire behind him explode in his face. He managed to mostly shield himself from the second explosion and punched the second Naruto, but that one was a bunshin too. The 2 explosions rattled Mizuki enough that he didn't notice. That was when the real Naruto jumped out of the bushes with a wooden sword and swung down on the traitor's punching arm. Naruto's swordplay is rough, but he's got good instinctive sense, and with Mizuki having a broken arm, it was just a matter of time before the kid took him down. Sarutobi couldn't help but chuckle at Naruto's multi-layered trap. It seemed that Naruto was able to apply his prank planning abilities to the type of situations he would face as a ninja. Hokage-sama, if I may ask, has Naruto been training with a sword for long? Is that why his academy taijutsu evaluations are poor? Kurenai ventured. Almost 2 years now, I think, Sarutobi replied. He explained it to me by saying that a sword's increased reach could keep opponents from taking advantage of his blind side. And that if they ever got close enough, a sword slash can attack a large area around him without needing sight on target. When he told me I gave him some scrolls to learn from, the basics and sword theory mostly. Kurenai nodded thoughtfully. That an academy student could find a solution to his personal weaknesses on his own and then independently train that skill without showing it for 2 years. You'll find that Naruto is quite determined to improve himself. In fact, his extended hospitalizations kept him away from the academy for nearly 8 months, meaning that he effectively made up a year's worth of academy instruction on his own. Kurenai's eyebrows arched at this. She hadn't known that Naruto had been hospitalized for quite that long. In that case, still managed to graduate with his peers despite having been out of the academy so long. Kurenai shuffled through some of Naruto's academy reports in her hands, glancing through them. He has a lot more potential than his academy instructors have realized. Indeed, and I'm counting on you to help him realize that potential. I'll do my best, Hokage-sama. Good. Sarutobi smiled at the red-eyed woman. Now, what I'm about to tell you is known by exactly 6 people, and you'll be the 7th. Naruto, myself, Hibiki, and Anko, Yamanaka Inoichi, and Chief of Medicine Sanzen and Yosushi. This is a secret you must keep at all costs, unless Naruto chooses to disclose it himself. Do you understand? Kurenai glanced at Anko before nodding, trying to think of what the secret might be. It obviously applied to Naruto, and given the involvement of both the Yamanaka clan patriarch and the hospital chief of medicine, it was likely something to do with Naruto's mental health. Did he have a split personality or something? The Hokage reached down and unlocked one of the secret compartments of his desk, pulling out a folder and passing it to Kurenai. This file will give you more detail on what I'm about to tell you. I'd like you to take it with you and read it tonight. You can return it tomorrow morning, make sure no one else sees it. Sarutobi watched as the young jounin pulled the folder close to her, where it seemingly disappeared into the complex patterns of black and white body-hugging ribbons that Kurenai's normal uniform appeared to be made out of. About a year after Naruto lost his left eye, he spontaneously developed a replacement, except this eye has a red iris around a dark red pupil. The second period of extended hospitalization in his official records was actually spent in an Anbu holding cell. He spent 2 months there until it was determined that this didn't pose a threat to Konoha. Ever since then I've told him to keep the eye hidden at all times, except in very specific life or death situations where it might prove to be an advantage. Given his background, you'll understand why I went to such lengths. The Hokage didn't need to elaborate. Kurenai was very much aware of how many villagers saw Naruto as being the Kyuubi reincarnated. If they suddenly saw him with an abnormal red eye, the results wouldn't be pretty. It was ironic that she herself went about Konoha with no problems at all with 2 eyes like that, although hers were just a quirk of family genetics. After extensive examinations, it was determined that the eye gives him slightly better vision than normal and also gives him an easier time seeing through minors. Yamanaka-san is of the opinion that this is an ability that might be improved on with some effort. That was one of the reasons I chose to put him on your team. Once he's comfortable with you, as a jounin instructor, you could suggest to him ways of exploring the eye's potential and seeing if there's any way to train it. Yes, Hokage-sama. If I may ask though, can you tell me where the eye came from? Is it a byproduct of being the Kyuubi's vessel, or is it something else? We weren't able to determine that, though Sanzanin-sensei and Yamanaka-san were satisfied that neither the eye nor Naruto's mind bear any traces of Kyuubi interference. Sanzanin-sensei speculated that it may be a manifestation of some unknown bloodline limit, as we don't know anything about Naruto's parentage, Sarutobi replied. It wasn't entirely factual, but it was true that no one knew much about the background of the boy's mother. This isn't the first time I've said it, and I'm sure this won't be the last, Sarutobi continued, but it seems as if nothing with Uzumaki Naruto is ever easy. For now just keep it in mind when you deal with the boy and report to me directly if there are any new developments. Now, if you have no other questions, the both of you are dismissed. Kurenai left the Hokage's office distractedly, thinking about the genin that made up her new team, while her body moved itself out of the building automatically. The Hokage didn't say anything outright, but someone with Naruto's childhood and circumstances would more likely than not have some emotional issues that would need to be addressed. Aburame Shino, on the other hand, was probably the easiest to deal with of the 3. He was competent, though unexceptional in all basic areas of shinobi skill, though if he was anything like the rest of his reserved clan it would be a challenge to get him interacting normally with the rest of his team. Haruno Sakura had her share of problems as well, if her academy evaluations were any indication. Kurenai was quite familiar with fangirl behavior from her own academy and genin days, and in her experience those who didn't let go of their fangirl mindset quickly after graduation tended to find their kunoichi careers cut short quite abruptly. The lucky ones were those who simply couldn't handle the reality of shinobi life and dropped out altogether. There was also the matter of molding the three of them into an effective team. Kurenai was so distracted by her thoughts that she didn't notice Anko following her until the younger Jounin jerked her out of her ruminations by energetically throwing an arm around her shoulder. "Yes, Anko," Kurenai sighed, "I have Sake at home." "Excellent," Anko proclaimed. "You can ask me anything you want about the kid while I get sloshed." The Hokage had me pulled from regular duties to be the kid's jailer for 2 months. As Anko followed her home singing some sexual innuendo-filled drinking song, Kurenai couldn't help but reflect back on the strange set of circumstances that had ended up with them becoming friends. Anko was loud, brash, and often rude. But for all her faults, she was utterly dependable when it mattered. The demanding life of an active duty shinobi did not always allow one to choose their own friends, but Kurenai knew that she could have done far worse than someone like Mitarashi Anko. Naruto sat in a corner of the academy classroom, reading a scroll he'd brought with him, while trying to ignore the curious glances of his soon-to-be ex-classmates. His thrashing at the hands of the Uchiha bastard and subsequent failure of the taijutsu exam had been witnessed by many of his classmates, so more than a few of them were wondering why he was sitting in the classroom that was supposed to be for graduating genin only. No one had actually come up to ask him though. "Oi Naruto, why are you here? Today's meeting is for graduates only." Until now. Naruto didn't reply to Shikamaru, opting to continue with his reading while he simply pointed at the 8 that was laid out on the desk in front of him. He knew that the pineapple-headed boy would find it too troublesome to press him for a verbal explanation if he didn't offer one first. Shikamaru slouched off to find a free seat, but as he left, Naruto caught the word the other boy had mumbled. Troublesome. Several minutes later, Naruto was startled from his reading when the classroom door was thrown open with a resounding bang. A glance up at the door showed Haruno Sakura and Yamanaka Ino simultaneously trying to struggle through the door past each other, followed by both of them squeezing through at the same time. Then the bickering began about who had made it first and thus who got to sit next to Sasuke. Naruto rubbed at his temple, trying to tune the two out. In the final exchange last night, Mizuki had managed to land a spinning kick against the side of his head that left his vision swimming and ears ringing before his instinctive counterstroke had put the traitor down for good. Now the screeching was threatening to bring his headache from last night back in full force. Naruto couldn't help but grimace and close his eyes tightly as some of the other girls who'd arrived earlier joined in to insist that they should be the ones to sit next to Sasuke. His hearing, and possibly his sanity, was saved when the classroom door opened again. This time it was Academy Instructor Yumino Iruka, team assignment rosters in hand. Aburame Shino sat on the roof of the academy, legs dangling over the edge, bento open, but practically untouched on his lap. Only his closest relatives would be able to tell from the slight changes in his carefully guarded demeanor, but Shino was annoyed. When he enrolled in the academy, Shino had decided, after consulting with his father, to place less emphasis on taijutsu training in favor of working with the Kakechu insects that were the foundation of his clan's unique abilities. It was a rational decision at the time. Increased expertise with his clan's abilities would allow his eventual genin team a number of tactical options that no one else in his year group could provide, while his taijutsu shortcomings could be overcome by being teamed with someone who was a close combat specialist. Until the day he graduated from the academy, Shino had seen no reason to regret his decision. Like most of the Aburame clan, he was taller and heavier than his peers, and his ability to take advantage of those attributes made him an above-average fighter compared to the rest of the class. Given the relatively small amount of time he devoted to taijutsu practice, Shino felt that was a satisfactory outcome. He was questioning the wisdom of that decision now. He had been teamed with Haruno Sakura, who, along with Hyuga Hinata, he had carefully monitored for the last 2 years of their academy classes. His father had once led a genin team, and from some of the clues the elder Aburame had dropped, it was not difficult for Shino to figure out the general principles behind genin team placement. Given the male-to-female ratio of his academy class and the potential of a reborn Ino Shikacho team, it was obvious that he would be placed with either Sakura or Hinata. Shino greatly respected the girl's intellectual capability. Her nearly perfect record in academy written tests was evidence enough of that. But she was also nearly, if not outright, the worst of their peers in taijutsu. From the way her skills had developed so slowly since he'd started watching her, he suspected that she put no effort into physical training outside of class time. The third member of their team was the boy who some of their classmates had taken to calling the dead last, Uzumaki Naruto. That label wasn't entirely without justification. Naruto had barely passed most of the graduation examinations and had failed the taijutsu portion outright. Still, Shino knew that academy records did not paint a complete picture when it came to Naruto. Between his two extended hospitalizations, the blonde had essentially missed out on a year of schooling and yet had managed to graduate on time with the rest of his peers. This was a sign of remarkable talent or initiative and should have been encouraged, yet many of the academy instructors seemed to take delight in ignoring Naruto whenever they could. Shino well remembered how frail and sickly the blonde looked on his first day back to classes a year and a half ago. His poor physical condition, combined with their classmates learning to take advantage of his blind side, had quickly dropped Naruto to the bottom of the class in taijutsu. Then, over the course of the next year and a half, Naruto had managed to claw his way back to the middle of the pack. Shino had to admit that Naruto's climb back up the rankings impressed him. It spoke of great determination on the blonde boy's part. Yet for all that effort, Shino was still able to beat him in practice more often than not. Then there was the matter of Naruto's taijutsu exam. Shino, engaged in his own match at the time, was one of the few who did not see Naruto's fight with Sasuke. What he had managed to gather later was that Sasuke had accidentally pulled the blonde boy's headband off during the match, and Naruto lost because he kept one hand over his face the rest of the fight to cover up his facial scarring. Shino did not know Naruto well, but he had difficulty imagining that the boy who had worked so hard over the last two. He had failed the taijutsu exam though, and thus didn't meet the requirements for genin graduation. But today he was a genin anyway. There was no official explanation, but what Shino managed to overhear in the Aburame clan compound indicated that Naruto was allowed to graduate because he had defeated Mizuki without help. Naruto, who had difficulty fighting academy classmate Shino, had managed to defeat a Chunin close combat specialist who taught taijutsu in the academy. It simply didn't make sense. Sighing and repacking his bento, Shino mentally set that problem aside in the growing pile he had taken to labeling the mystery of Uzumaki Naruto. Lunch was almost over, and he had to return back to the classroom for the first meeting with the team's jounin instructor. Haruno Sakura ambled casually through the streets of Konoha, annoyance clearly visible on her face. After announcing the team assignments, Iruka had dismissed the class for lunch, with a reminder to return an hour later to meet their jounin instructors. As she was on a diet, Sakura chose to skip lunch, instead passing the time wandering around the village. Sakura couldn't understand why she had been put on a team with the dead last and the creepy bug boy. She knew her taijutsu wasn't very good, but she was academically at the top of her class, wasn't she? It makes more sense to have her on Sasuke-kun's team so their strengths could complement each other. Why hadn't the academy instructors seen such an obvious fact? Then there were her teammates. She sympathized with Naruto having lost an eye, but shouldn't he have learned to give up and find a civilian job where his handicap wouldn't hurt him so much? He had managed to produce a pair of sickly-looking bunshin during the portion of the exam and had passed by a hair. Then Sasuke-kun completely outclassed him during the taijutsu exam. She even beat Naruto from time to time during practice. What use would the blonde boy be as part of the team? Sakura had to admit that, from academy readings that gave a brief overview of the abilities of Konoha's various major clans, that Shino could be useful in a team. But there was something just so wrong about having bugs in your body. She would just have to tell Shino to never use his bugs anywhere near her, or she'd beat him up. Turning around to retrace her steps, Sakura sighed as she made her way back to the academy. She really wasn't looking forward to working with her team. Even Ino Pig had managed to get a better team with Shikamaru and Chaoji. Lazy and fat she could deal with, but useless and creepy was just a bit too much for her. Naruto didn't bother with lunch. With all that had happened yesterday, he had forgotten about restocking groceries. Then in the morning, faced with his last cup of instant ramen, he had opted to eat it rather than saving it for lunch. Instead, Naruto made his way to the nearest training ground as quickly as he could. During Iruka's lecture about what it means to be a shinobi of the leaf, Naruto had mentally reviewed the final exchange between Mizuki and himself. He had come to the conclusion that he had stepped too far forward and overextended himself when trying a diagonal downward slash on Mizuki, and that was what provided the opening for the traitor to kick him. He wanted to physically test out his ideas before meeting with his jounin instructor. Naruto didn't give much thought to his teammates. Gigi had pulled some strings to let him graduate, and for that he was grateful. He'd work with whoever they teamed him with and train as much as he could so that he could be a competent ninja. He had to repay the debt he owed the old man after all. Team 10. Akimichi Chouji, Nara Shikamaru, and Yamanaka Ino, this is your Jounin instructor Saratobi Asuma. Follow him out. The new Ino Shika-cho team dutifully followed Asuma out of the classroom, though not without Ino giving Sasuke's back one last longing look. There were 7 left in the classroom now, the members of Teams 7 and 8, plus Iruka. Naruto had once again buried himself in his reading, only peripherally paying attention to his surroundings. After returning from lunch, Shino had chosen to take the seat beside him and was now sitting, as impassively as a statue. Sakura had taken the opportunity of other teams leaving to move to the now empty seat beside Sasuke and was trying to engage the black-haired boy in conversation. From what Naruto could tell, she would have had just as much success talking to a Sasuke wall poster. Naruto's eye was drawn to the door by the sound of it opening, and he was startled by what he saw. A kunoichi, presumably a Jounin instructor, walked through the door. She had black feathery hair that drifted down to her collarbones, and her uniform appeared to be a red sleeve attached to some odd assortment of black and white bandages that weaved around her body in some kind of pattern. What caught Naruto's attention, however, were the crimson irises of her eyes. Team 8, Aburame Shino, Haruno Sakura, and Uzumaki Naruto, this is your Jounin instructor Yuhi Kurenai, follow her out. Iruka's words brought Naruto back to his immediate surroundings, and he realized the Jounin instructor had seen him staring at her and was watching him in turn. He turned his eye downward and followed her out the door, brushing past Sakura when she turned to stare longingly at Sasuke before exiting the room. Kurenai waved for the 3 to follow her and then led them out of the academy and to the adjacent playground. Once there, she motioned for her students to sit down on some nearby logs before taking a seat facing them. Naruto had chosen to simply plop himself down on the log closest to where he was, while Shino sat on an adjacent log. Sakura had taken a detour to find a seat that would put Naruto between herself and Shino, and also sat at the far edge of her log away from her new teammates. It also did not escape Kurenai's notice that Naruto was watching her with a carefully, almost deliberately, neutral expression. Since she knew Naruto's secret, it wasn't difficult to guess what he was thinking, so she decided to put the boy at ease. My red eyes are just a genetic quirk of the family, there's nothing special about them, Kurenai said with a smile towards him. The tension visible in his shoulders eased, and his face relaxed slightly into a more natural expression. Now, Kurenai has begun, let's get to know each other so we can start off on the right foot, as a team. Who you are, likes, dislikes, hobbies, goals for the future, that kind of thing. I'll start. My name is Yuhi Kurenai, and I'm a specialist. I like drinking with my friends and coming up with interesting ways to use them. I dislike braggarts and people who think it isn't as useful as ninjutsu. My hobby is cooking, especially trying new recipes. My goal for the future is to make sure you all advance yourselves as shinobi safely and successfully. Kurenai turned her eyes to Shino, prompting him to take up the introductions. My name is Aburame Shino. I like studying insects and winter melon soup. I dislike loud people and strong-smelling foods. My hobby is collecting insects to add to my collection, and my goal for the future is to contribute something new to my clan's library. Kurenai nodded, that was more or less what she expected from Shino. She turned to Sakura next. My name is Haruno Sakura. I like Sasuke-kun and taking care of my hair. I dislike Ino Pig and annoying people. I like to spend time singing karaoke and watching movies, and my goal for the future is to become a great kunoichi, so Sasuke-kun will recognize my worth. Kurenai nodded at Sakura's introduction, carefully masking her thoughts from her face. As she expected, Sakura would need a great deal of work. The girl's life revolved too much around her crush for her to be an effective shinobi. Setting those thoughts aside for the moment, Kurenai turned to the last member of her team. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I like Hokage Jiji and training. I dislike people who look down on me. My hobby's music, and my goal for the future I don't really know. I promised Jiji that I would work hard to graduate, but now I guess my goal for the future is to become a chunin. Kurenai looked at the boy, trying to reconcile what she was seeing and hearing now with the vague image of the boy she remembered from before he lost his eye. Back then his most immediate feature was the horribly ugly orange jumpsuit, which he had now replaced with a plain white t-shirt and gray cargo pants. Her eyes also picked out, partially hidden beneath the sleeves, chakra-enhanced arm and leg weights. They were of the type used by ninja for physical therapy and training, as chakra could be pumped into them to increase their weight far beyond what their physical size would suggest. The other thing she remembered of the boy was how some of the ninjas she knew had laughed at his ambition of becoming Hokage then, and now there was no mention of that goal. Genjutsu relied strongly on an understanding of human psychology to be effective, and Kurenai was better than most at the art. She came to the realization that social isolation lay at the root of Naruto's problems. The visually loud orange jumpsuit, the elaborate pranks, and the lofty ambition, all of those things were classic attention-seeking behavior from a child being denied it. When Naruto was almost killed, he had gotten the attention he sought and found out he didn't want it anymore. The Hokage had then gotten the child to promise to work hard to achieve genin status, and that promise was what had sustained Naruto for the last 2 years. And now he found himself floundering for direction again. Kurenai gave the boy a nod, acknowledging his self-introduction. It was customary, though not strictly necessary, for Jounin instructors to give their new teams a final test at this point. She already had one planned out, and giving it to them now would give her some time to plan out how she could address Sakura and Naruto's problems. Very good. Now that we've all introduced ourselves, it's time to move on to your final graduation test. Graduation test? Sakura asked, but we already graduated. You have graduated, yes, but you're not a full genin until you pass a test given by your Jounin instructor. Those who fail the test will be recycled back to the academy for another year. Right now, your classmates in other teams are being told the same thing. What kind of test is it? This time it was Naruto with the question. Kurenai took note of her students' expressions. Sakura's face was an open book of apprehension tinged with a hint of fear. She was likely afraid that the test would be of an entirely practical nature. Shino appeared impassive, as ever, though she noted the slight tension in the boy's shoulders indicating unease. In between them, Naruto had slipped back into a carefully guarded expression. The Jounin moved a hand to her uniform and seemingly pulled a thin folder out of nowhere. In truth, it was a minor that she had developed to go along with her unusual uniform. Handing the folder to Naruto, seated in between his teammates, she watched as the three crowded closer to examine the folder's contents. When Naruto flipped the folder open, she saw the flash of recognition in his eye, which confirmed to Kurenai where he had gotten the idea of using his 8 to cover his left eye. The person you're looking at is Haddock Kakashi, Jounin instructor for Team 7, she explained. On the next page you'll find a basic profile on him, plus an outline of his schedule for tomorrow morning. This was accompanied by Naruto moving the photograph to one side, allowing the team to read the next page. She gave them a few moments to absorb the carefully edited profile of Kakashi she had specially written before continuing. Kakashi has agreed to help me with my test by sticking to that schedule, though he doesn't know the full details. Amongst other things, he has a reputation for being chronically late. He's holding the genin test for his own team tomorrow. He's going to tell his team to show up to the third training ground at 5 in the morning, but he's not planning on showing up until almost noon. Would a Jounin really be that late? Asked Sakura skeptically. Kurenai gave the pink-haired girl a smile. Normally, not so much. Kakashi does have a habit of being late. He has what some might consider a valid reason, though I'm not going to justify his actions to you, nor am I going to tell you what his reason is. His lateness is usually on the order of an hour or so though. Being 6 hours late is actually part of his plan for testing his genin team. Your test will take place in 2 parts. Your objective is to get Kakashi to make it to the third training ground before he intends to, without letting him or his genin know of your true intentions. Of course, this means you can't tell your friends on Kakashi's team that he's planning to show up late. You'll do your planning with each other now, and I'll be evaluating you as you do that. I'll also evaluate how well you carry your plans out tomorrow, as well as how you adapt and improvise should your plans fail. Kurenai left unstated the fact that she did not actually expect them to succeed. She was more interested in seeing how well they planned and worked together at this point. Kurenai-sensei, is it necessary for us to conduct our planning here? 2.5 pairs of eyes turned towards one pair hidden behind dark sunglasses. The 2 genin candidates were surprised because Shino, to their knowledge, had never asked a question during his academy years. Kurenai on the other hand was pleased at the quiet boy's willingness to speak up amongst his teammates. No, you can choose to go anywhere you want. I'll be accompanying you though, and I expect you to have some kind of plan worked out within a reasonable amount of time. Then perhaps it would benefit us to plan this out in one of the library's study rooms. There will be fewer distractions, and we will be able to make use of the library's detailed street maps. Good idea, Shino-kun. Sakura exclaimed. Naruto, for his part, patted the taller boy on the shoulder before gathering the folder's contents and leading the way to the library. Kurenai was encouraged by their interaction. Small gestures like these were important first steps in creating a cohesive team. What if we just attack him here? Sakura asked as she pointed to a spot on the large map laid out before them and drove him towards the training ground. It's not far from this spot. 2 reasons, Naruto replied. First, Kurenai-sensei said she would be evaluating us based on our planning, as well as execution. I doubt that attack him, and hope he does what we want makes for a well-thought-out plan. Second, he's a jounin, and if they kept him in active service after losing an eye, probably a very good one. There's no way 3 fresh from the academy genin could take him in a fight. If that were the case, the Sasuke Fangirl Legion would have overthrown the Hokage by revolution already and renamed this place the village hidden in Sasuke's overinflated ego. From the back of the study room, Kurenai suppressed the urge to smile as Sakura fumed about the insult to Sasuke but didn't voice a disagreement. The raised collar hid Shino's mouth, but Kurenai was sure that she saw the preternaturally stoic boy's shoulders vibrate slightly. The 3 had been going at it for about an hour, and each had settled into their respective roles. Naruto was the one to suggest most of the ideas, ranging from the bizarre, kidnapping Kakashi's team in the morning, to the morally dubious, peeping on the women's side of the hot springs in Kakashi Henge, then getting the angry women to chase the real Kakashi, to the somewhat workable, stealing Kakashi's little orange book. Shino was the one to critique Naruto's ideas, taking them apart in such detail that Kurenai wondered just how bad the boy would be to watch movies with. For her part, Sakura acted as a bulwark against some of Naruto's more questionable ideas. Naruto. How could you think of using orphans to threaten Kakashi? I wasn't really going to hurt them, just make Kakashi think so. I would have bribed their cooperation with ramen. All orphans love ramen, don't they? She made occasional suggestions on how to improve aspects of more reasonable plans Naruto came up with as well, and had also shown her organizational skills by arranging a thread on the map to indicate Kakashi's expected route, fixing the thread in place with a series of pins that she had attached time labels to. Okay, new idea, Naruto declared as he crossed out several lines on the pad before him. I think this one will work, but I'm going to need to borrow money from one of you. It's getting near the end of the month, and I don't have enough left in my monthly stipend. Kurenai watched as Naruto gradually refined his plan, scribbling notes routes on the map and modifying things here and there based on a criticism from Shino or a suggestion from Sakura. She had to admit that she was intrigued. The plan was as wildly outlandish as it was surprisingly feasible. The red-eyed jounin decided then and there that she would pass this team based on what she had seen so far. But it wouldn't do to tell them just yet. No, she did not want to miss out on the fun of watching them put Kakashi through the ringer. As the sun fully crested the eastern horizon, preparing to make its long journey across the sky, the early rising citizens of Konoha were treated to an unusual sight. Haddock Kakashi, famed copy ninja, elite jounin, perpetually late pervert, found himself strolling aimlessly through the streets of the village. Hours before he had even intended to wake up today. At least, he thought to himself as he turned the page of the little orange pornographic book in his hands, there's a new volume of Icha Icha. 2 nights ago Kurenai had asked for his help with testing her soon-to-be genin team. His first inclination had been to decline, but then she reminded him how she had saved him from the challenges of a very drunk and rambling Mito guy the last time the jounin had been out drinking as a group. He had reluctantly agreed, only to find a piece of paper with a list of times and locations shoved into his hand before Kurenai slipped away. She wouldn't tell him what exactly she was making her genin team do, but Kakashi had a pretty good idea anyway. Something caught his attention out of the corner of his eye, and he spun around to see himself disappear from view around a corner. Complete with the little orange book and perverted giggle. Kakashi knew exactly what was going on. He had noticed the child secretly following him around, studying his posture and mannerisms. When the child had then started going around the village disguised under a Kakashi hinge, the copycat ninja had covertly tailed him a few times to see what the boy intended to do with his likeness. Kakashi had come away from those observation sessions satisfied that the child wasn't doing anything improper and at the same time had been impressed by the young blonde's unorthodox solution to the problem of interacting with hostile villagers. Uzumaki Naruto, Kakashi mumbled to himself, this may be more interesting than I originally thought. Making for the side alley that his clone had taken earlier, Kakashi was just in time to catch a glimpse of the disguised Naruto slipping around another corner. The Jounin could tell that he was being deliberately led somewhere, but with his curiosity, Pete decided to follow along. 3 side alleys later, Kakashi realized that Naruto was leading him towards an outdoor food market which was popular as a breakfast spot amongst morning laborers. Kakashi frowned, though it was hidden underneath his mask. Did Naruto not know that the food market would be crowded this time of day? How did he expect 2 identical copies of Kakashi, one following the other, to not attract attention? Shrugging, Kakashi turned the corner into the open-air market. He was just in time to watch himself walk past a dango stand, grabbing a purple-haired trench-coated woman's ass as he passed before ducking around yet another corner. The woman whirled around to look for her groper before her eyes settled murderously on the one-eyed shinobi before her, who was walking around in broad daylight with pornography in his hands. Oh crap. Kakashi. I'm going to kill you, you pervert. Anko roared as she jumped at him. Kakashi spun on his heels and bolted as fast as he could in the other direction. As he ran, it did not escape his attention that the side alley he had just come from and the next 2, as well, had been suddenly blocked off by crates. So he was still being led along by Kurenai's genin team. The 3rd side alley was clear and connected at the other end to a busy main road where Kakashi could easily lose the enraged purple-haired Jounin. It was more than likely a trap, but Kakashi darted down it anyway. He was somewhat amused by how things had played out so far and was curious what the next step would be. What he did not expect was to see 2 people running at him from the other side of the narrow alley, another copy of himself and another enraged-looking Anko. It was Naruto again, and probably the Haruno girl under a hinge. Kakashi skidded to a stop, preparing to escape to the rooftops when a mass of writhing darkness fell over him. The Aburame boy's bugs, his mind helpfully supplied. The unexpected bug attack startled him enough that Naruto was able to sprint the distance between them and crash into him, sending the young boy tumbling and dispelling his Kakashi henge disguise. The real Kakashi decided that the 3 genin had managed to come too close for his comfort. Grabbing the little orange book that he had dropped during the collision, Kakashi proceeded to disappear in a puff of smoke, using a quick shunshin to reappear several blocks away. Kakashi idly brushed some dust off his vest while reviewing the last few minutes in his mind. The plan, as audacious and multi-layered as it was, bore Naruto's unmistakable fingerprints. Some of the kid's more elaborate pranks were practically legendary amongst the Chunin who were routinely assigned to track him down or pick up the pieces after a prank. Given that the teams had only been formed the day before, they had nevertheless managed to coordinate their teamwork at a pretty decent level too. Kakashi only hoped that his own team would show that level of teamwork when he tested them later. But, as good as Kurenai's kids' planning had been up to that point, the clash in the alley had been a mistake. It was foolish for the 3 of them to think that they could take a Jounin on in any kind of confrontation. The masked Jounin turned away, prepared to waste another few hours wandering the streets with the new volume of Icha Icha before heading to meet his own team. With an indecent giggle, he brought the book to his face, flipped to the next page, and began reading. But we mustn't, Minoru-kun, someone might see, Akira protested weakly, gasping, as the taller boy's hand slipped into his shorts. What the hell? Kakashi turned the page. Akira's too large uniform slipped off his shoulders and puddled at his feet, his boyishly shy face looking to one side as he bared himself. Kakashi flipped the little book over and jerked the orange dust jacket off, his visible eye widening in surprise and annoyance at what he saw. A fraction of a second later he had disappeared in another puff of shunshin smoke, with just one thought on his mind. Those little bastards, they were going to pay. Naruto ran, as if his life depended on it. And, he thought between labored breaths, it just might. Every heartbeat thundered painfully in his ears. Every breath was like liquid fire in his lungs. But he ran on. His teammates had done all they could, but there was no one left now. It was up to him to finish the mission. He had left behind his customary training weights when he dressed in the morning, foregoing them to squeeze every last drop of speed he could from his small frame. Even now he felt a little unusual moving without them, as accustomed to them, as he was after nearly 2 years of constant usage. The weight difference had allowed him to make it to the edge of the village in record time. The last of Konoha's buildings passed by in a blur, and now he was in a sea of indistinct green. He was close, just a little further to the goal. He was going to make it. He was. Naruto suddenly found himself choking, feet flying forward into the air as his forward motion was abruptly halted by an arm across his neck. The next moment he found himself flat on his back, staring unfocused at the sky, fighting the urge to throw up. His assailant leaned down and grabbed double handfuls of his shirt, jerking him back to his feet. In his winded state, it was all he could do to throw a weak flailing hook punch at where he thought his attacker's face was. Naruto's attack was easily brushed aside, and then the attacker grabbed at the fabric of Naruto's shirt just below the elbow, while his other arm hooked under the boy's armpit. Before Naruto's mind could process what had happened, he found himself being slung violently over his attacker's shoulder, flying to land awkwardly on his back again. A feminine voice barked out, "Stop, both you. This mission is over." Naruto found himself being lifted to his feet again, this time more gently. He took a few staggering steps before collapsing against the trunk of a nearby tree, using his arms to hold his upper body vertical while he gulped in large breaths of air. Kurenai landed in the small clearing next to Kakashi, watching her student struggle to return his breathing to normal. A minute later, Shino made his way into the clearing, panting heavily from the exertion of trying to catch up with Naruto. He was followed shortly after by an embarrassed-looking Sakura, slung unceremoniously under Anko's arm like a sack of rice. Kakashi lifted the brow of his visible eye. "So you were in on it too?" Anko grinned in reply, while putting Sakura on her feet. "What can I say? The plan sounded interesting, and he bribed me with a month of dango." "First things first," Kakashi insisted, "my book." Naruto reached into one of the larger pockets of his pants, pulling out a little orange book and holding it up. Kakashi took his precious book and thrust a replacement at Naruto, only for the boy to jerk his thumb at Sakura without looking. Understanding the boy's meaning, Kakashi tossed a book at Sakura, who caught it and quickly shoved it in her hip pouch with a blush. "So," Kurenai began, "thoughts?" The one-eyed Jounin had already flipped his orange book open and replied without looking up from its pages. "Good planning and coordination, I'd say. Shorty needs to learn how to pick his shots more carefully though." Anko asked Kurenai. "Just make sure you give them enough free time for the kid to get me my dango." Kurenai took a few seconds to mentally review the events of the morning. She had decided to pass the team while watching them plan yesterday, and seeing their execution today had only confirmed her decision. She was looking forward to working with this group. "I didn't expect you three to succeed with the test, but you were a lot closer than I thought you would be. I'm happy to announce that Team 8 officially passes. We'll start team training and missions tomorrow." Kurenai watched with a smile as Sakura threw her arms into the air and cheered. Next to her, Naruto pulled himself to his feet with a small smile on his face. Even Shino brought a hand to his face to adjust his sunglasses. "If you three have no plans for this afternoon," Kurenai continued, "I'm inviting you to my place for lunch to celebrate. We can also go over how you guys did with the test." "Great!" Anko cheered, grabbing Naruto by the back of his collar and pulling him out of the clearing before he could resist. "We'll be there in a bit with dango and booze." On their first day as an official team, Kurenai assembled them at the crack of dawn to evaluate their skills and abilities, and had begun by putting them through a 3-hour-long workout that could have matched Mito guys in intensity, if not in duration. As she expected, Sakura fell behind quickly, while Shino kept up past the halfway mark. Naruto was able to complete the entire workout, though he was barely standing afterwards. Team 8 was allowed time to recover as she gave them a lecture on the different classes of missions and the exact duties they would be expected to perform as new genin. No matter how potentially well-trained, new academy graduates were still preteens. Kurenai had heard horror stories from more experienced Jounin instructors about genin who, discovering the drudgery that was D-rank missions, had thrown temper tantrums at the mission hall or in front of the Hokage. She had no intention of allowing that to happen with her team. That was followed by an hour of shuriken and kunai testing. Unlike academy practice, however, Kurenai had her students throwing from a variety of situations. Strafing on the run, retreating, throwing from a quick turn, crouched in a tree, mid-jump, and others. As his academy evaluations suggested he would, Shino performed solidly, if unspectacular, in all situations. Because of this, Kurenai set him to practicing a number of more advanced throwing techniques that weren't covered by academy lessons, such as throwing from the draw in one motion and concealing the throwing motion to hide the projectile's flight path before it left the thrower's hand. Sakura's was adequate from a stationary posture, putting the majority of her projectiles into the target painted on the large tree stump. While on the move, though, her aim deteriorated badly, and she could only hit the stump itself with any consistency. Kurenai did what she could to correct the girl's throwing motion, as well as giving her additional tips, but ultimately concluded that what Sakura needed was simply a lot more practice. It didn't surprise her that Naruto was wildly off the mark when throwing on the move, managing to hit the stump only once all session. It did surprise her, however, when he missed the stump far more often than not from stationary throwing postures. In fact, he never even managed to touch the target from any throwing posture. "Naruto, how did you manage to pass the Academy Thrown Weapons test anyway?" she inquired. "Well, I watched the testing for last year's graduates, so I knew which stumps the instructors would use and how far away I needed to be. I snuck into the academy practice grounds at nights so I could practice like that, and I just kept at it until I guess I memorized exactly how my body needed to feel to put my throw on target at each distance." Naruto looked away, scratching the back of his head. It was clear that he felt a little uncomfortable about having cheated in order to pass. Kurenai simply curled a brow. "You mean you practiced at each testing distance until you had the exact movement pattern needed to hit at each testing distance, committed to muscle memory?" "Yeah, I guess," Naruto replied sheepishly. Kurenai briefly contemplated having him do the same thing for every angle, from every position, at intervals of a few steps at a time, before discarding that idea as both impractically extensive and simply unnecessary. She wondered, though, whether he would actually do it if she asked him to and presented him with a convincing argument for why his throwing skills needed to be top-notch. "You don't have to be embarrassed about how you passed. If anything, you deserve credit for finding a solution to your unique situation and then having the determination to work at it until you succeed. Thanks, I guess." Naruto gave her a small smile at the unaccustomed acknowledgement. "Just remember," Kurenai said, "every ninja has unique strengths and weaknesses. You know your weaknesses and have found ways to overcome some of them. If you're not good at throwing weapons, you just need to find some way of beating ranged specialists by forcing them to fight where you're strongest." After the thrown weapons session, Kurenai then had each of her students demonstrate all of their ninjutsu abilities, one by one. There were several purposes to this exercise. The obvious one was so she could evaluate their skill with ninjutsu, but it was also so the genin would be familiar with each other's abilities. Although Sakura only knew the academy basic ninjutsu and had a smaller than average chakra reserve, Kurenai was pleased to note that her academy evaluations were correct about her precise chakra control. Shino followed next with his own demonstration of the academy basics. He then created a bunshin out of his Kakechu and explained the other things he could do with his bugs, such as passing messages with bugs that could tap their hindquarters and planting female bugs with special glands on targets so they could be tracked by scent later. It was at this point that Sakura had insisted quite firmly that he never put any of his bugs on her in pain of getting beaten by an irate Kunoichi. When it was Naruto's turn, he dutifully rose and ran through the academy basics, finishing with the sickly-looking bunshin that had almost gotten him failed during the ninjutsu portion of the graduation exam. Naruto created a bunshin again, but completed the hand seals more quickly this time, Kurenai ordered. Naruto nodded and complied with her order, completing the seals more quickly and producing another poorly made bunshin. Again. He tried again, this time racing through the hand seals. As he finished, Kurenai discreetly made her own hand seal and hit him with a minor, meant to disrupt his concentration with a quick flash of brightness. It wasn't very useful and would have been automatically tuned out by more experienced shinobi with better chakra control. But with Naruto it was enough. Kurenai watched as Naruto rubbed the blurriness out of his eye, only to be startled by the sight of a perfectly made bunshin staring back at him. "Interesting," Kurenai murmured thoughtfully. "Kurenai-sensei, what was that flash of light? Did you do something so I could make a bunshin?" Naruto asked. "Naruto, did you ever wonder why you were able to trick Mizuki with your bunshin when you've never been able to make a proper one during academy testing?" "Not really, I just thought that he'd be too disoriented by the exploding tags to notice how crappy they looked. No, Anko watched your fight and told me the bunshin were virtually perfect copies." Seeing the confusion in Naruto's expression, Kurenai explained. "As I thought, you were overloading your bunshin with chakra. During the fight you produced bunshin from opposite sides of Mizuki within seconds before attacking from a third, meaning you didn't have time to stand and gather chakra like you do in a classroom test. With the last attempt I hit you with a minor to distract you, causing you to lose some of your built-up chakra as you created the bunshin. So my problem the whole time was too much chakra? Naruto asked dubiously before flicking through the hand seals and creating another bunshin with none of his usual tension and concentration. Again, it came out perfectly. You have an exceptionally large chakra reserve, easily the largest of any genin I've ever seen. I'm surprised your academy instructors didn't bring it up, Kurenai said. Actually, she wasn't, but now wasn't the time to deal with that topic. Naruto's eye widened slightly, while Sakura looked at her teammate skeptically, and one of Shino's eyebrows rose. In time that's going to be a major advantage, but it's common for ninja with larger than normal capacities to have problems with chakra control, Kurenai continued, for now we need to work on your control so you're not overloading every try. Some of them just get bigger and better with more chakra, but most fizzle out or have even worse consequences for the user. Afterwards she allowed her team a late lunch break, with Naruto producing a pair of cup ramen, while the rest of the team brought out their respective bento. Lunch passed mostly in silence, with the genin having been sufficiently tired out from the morning's exertions that they put their entire focus into eating. Once everyone had finished, Kurenai then moved to the final topic she wanted to cover for the day, taijutsu. Standing under the shade of a tree in teammates' designated training ground, Shino watched as Naruto once again squared off with his roughly carved wooden katana against their sensei. Naruto settled into a right side forward stance with left heel slightly off the ground, both hands holding the sword at abdomen level with the blade diagonally upwards. The sword isn't a part of the standard Konoha Academy curriculum, but Shino recognized this as the most basic and versatile stance from supplementary reading assignments. Kurenai adopted a left leg forward crouched stance, shoulders squared with most of her weight on her front leg, both hands in a tight guard in front of her face and throat. It was a strongly defensive posture, but difficult to attack out of. For a few seconds the two watched each other in silence, Naruto breathing slightly fast from their previous exchanges. It was Sakura, after the celebratory lunch at Kurenai's place the day before, who had finally asked Naruto about his fight with Mizuki. From the Jounin's reaction it was evident that Kurenai already knew, and while Shino was curious he had been content to wait until the answer revealed itself in some way. Naruto had then explained his reasoning behind taking up and how he only practiced taijutsu to the extent that he felt he needed to graduate from the academy. Naruto made the first move, stepping then lunging forward into a thrust at Kurenai's chest. The Jounin instructor parried the wooden blade to one side and threw a front kick at Naruto's midsection, which was blocked when the blonde dropped his weight on his back leg and brought the sword's hilt down to meet the kick. He then flicked the tip of the sword at Kurenai's left temple in a feint before stepping to her right, twisting his hips hard while flipping his hands and sending the blade crashing down diagonally hard at the right side of his sensei's neck. Kurenai read his intention and decided to forego a safer attack in favor of the opportunity to test how he dealt with opponents invading his personal space. She put up a hand to guard against a feint before taking advantage of her flexibility to lean back deeply, allowing the blade to pass over her face during the true attack. As she recovered her posture she dashed forward at Naruto, left palm heel flying at his face. Naruto responded by twisting his body to the left, twisting his head out of the path of the palm heel, while pulling the blade along at abdomen level with his body motion. It was a good response, Kurenai thought approvingly, difficult to counter at such close ranges. The only drawbacks were the head twist putting her out of his range of vision, and the fact that a wooden blade instead of steel meant a nasty bruise if it landed, rather than a likely disembowelment. Kurenai dropped her upper body down and forward, as if to roll, letting the blade slice harmlessly over her before continuing the motion into a cartwheel. At the movement's apex she twisted her hips, tapping the back of Naruto's head with her foot. Deciding to press him more she lunged after his retreating form as soon as she was on her feet again, springing into the air as she approached. As she expected, Naruto rooted his stance and brought the katana up to his head to protect against a jumping kick he thought was coming. Kurenai caught a glimpse of the surprise on his face as she flew clear over him in a flip, landing in a crouch with her back to his several steps away. As soon as she touched down, Kurenai sprung off her feet again, this time into a backflip at Naruto. Using the momentum of the movement, she sent the instep of her right foot crashing down on him from directly overhead while she was in an upside-down position in the middle of the backflip. Naruto just barely managed to twist to his right and bring his forearm up to block the attack, not having enough time to turn fully and bring his katana into play. Planting her right fingertips on the ground, while still upside down, Kurenai shifted her weight to one side and spun like a tilted top, chambering her right leg while whipping her left leg behind her to attack Naruto from his left. He caught a hint of her intention and tried to shift his body out of the way, but the heel of Kurenai's left leg managed to clip him painfully in the back of the ribs on his left side. A second later, she struck with her chambered right leg in a thrust kick, connecting with the fleshy part of Naruto's right upper arm. Kurenai pushed against his arm, sending him staggering away from her, while she used the motion to flip out of her tilted upside-down posture to land upright in a crouch facing Naruto. "Enough," Kurenai said with a raised hand. "Shino, Sakura, you two are up next." The bug user and the pink-haired Kunoichi made their way to the center of the clearing while Kurenai and Naruto took their place in the shade. Sakura adopted the Academy standard taijutsu ready position, while Shino used a variant with a deeper posture and his front hand placed more aggressively to take advantage of his height and weight advantage. Sakura charged first, meeting a stationary Shino and throwing a series of punches and kicks that Kurenai mentally identified as Academy Taijutsu training combo number 16. Shino blocked and parried his way through the assault with little effort, countering during a break in the combo's rhythm with a stepping palm strike to the abdomen that sent the girl staggering backwards. After a few moments recovery, Sakura attacked with another Academy standard combo to the same lack of success before the bug user latched onto her outstretched fist and pulled it backwards. Sakura stumbled before recovering her balance, just in time for Shino to kick out her front leg across her body while pulling her arm in the opposite direction, dropping her straight down to the ground in a boneless heap. Kurenai frowned slightly as Shino took a few steps back to give Sakura space to return to her feet. After two exchanges, Sakura was already beginning to breathe heavily, while Shino was absolutely still in his stance, showing no visible signs of exertion. In addition to basic shinobi skills, Academy students were also required to learn everything civilian children of their age did. Because of that, Academy classes tended to focus their limited time on teaching new skills and knowledge, leaving physical training to the students on their own initiative. Clan children invariably had supplementary training with family members. But it seemed that Sakura, coming from a civilian home, lacked the background and motivation to have made a serious effort outside of Academy classes. Kurenai added that to her mental list of things she would have to work with the pink-haired girl on. Beside her, Naruto had flipped out a small wood carving knife from his pocket and was now working on the half-finished sword in his hand, alternating his attention from the sword to the match before him. While the two combatants in the center of the clearing circled each other, Kurenai sent the boy a questioning glance. "The one I used against Mizuki got badly cracked, and I've learned it's easier to just make my own replacements instead of scrounging every time I break one in practice." Naruto replied simply and then added after a moment's pause, "It's a good skill to have when you want to repair your own furniture too. But that looks more like a samurai-style katana, doesn't it?" Naruto shrugged, shaving another sliver of wood off the katana. "My first sword was a wooden anbu-style ninjutsu. I've been gradually adapting the sword design to fit my own needs with each new version. Making the sword longer helps with more reach, and the curved blade is better for slashing attacks." Kurenai nodded, turning her attention back to the fight. This time Shino took the initiative, throwing a series of quick probing attacks designed to keep Sakura on the defensive before winding up a leaping spinning back crescent kick that crashed through Sakura's guard. Even though Shino had deliberately used only the minimum amount of strength necessary on the attack, it still sent Sakura reeling across the clearing. "Enough, you can stop now," Kurenai called out, and the two combatants rejoined the rest of their team in the shade. Shino accepted the bottled water Naruto proffered with a nod of acknowledgement, while their Jounin instructor placed her hands on Sakura's face where Shino had struck. Kurenai wasn't a medic nin by any stretch of the imagination, but she had picked up enough to be able to deal with bruises and other minor injuries. "After seeing all of you sparring, I now have a good idea of where we are and how I want each of you to progress. Sakura, you have a good intellectual understanding of the taijutsu taught at the academy, but you haven't internalized it enough to make yourself an effective fighter. The biggest problem, though, is the fact that you lack stamina, as well as the strength and flexibility to use a lot of the techniques and strategies effectively." Sakura accepted her instructor's words without comment. While she didn't like any aspect of her ninja skills belittled, she acknowledged that her physical conditioning was sorely lacking compared to the rest of her team. "So," Kurenai continued, "I'm going to come by your place later tonight with a scroll of exercises for you to do on your own time, and I expect you to follow the schedule to the best of your ability. Once we bring you up to a decent point physically, we'll work on improving your sparring skills." Kurenai then turned to the bug user. "Shino, I noticed you made adjustments to the basic academy style to take advantage of your height and weight. But you rely too much on blocking and not enough on movement, so in sparring I want you to focus on dodging where you would normally block and sidestepping where you'd move forwards or backwards. Evasion and lateral movement give you more options in a fight. Against certain fighters like the Hyuga with their Jyuiken, dodging is a much better option than blocking." She then turned to her last student. "Naruto, your instincts are sharp and you have good movement efficiency. You tend to get sloppy when an exchange gets too long though, probably because you haven't had a partner to practice against until now. You need more experience sparring to polish what you already know, but I also want you to keep up with taijutsu in your own practice time so you won't be completely overwhelmed if you lose your sword in a fight." Kurenai allowed her students a few moments to absorb what she'd said before clapping her hands together to attract their attention. "Now, I think Team 8 is ready for its first official mission." Kurenai's team had been amongst the last to arrive at the mission hall that day, as she had spent so much time evaluating her team's skills. Only 2D rank missions were left at the time, processing herbs and delivering packages for an herbalist who lived at the edge of town or catching Daimyo's wife's cat Tora. Kurenai chose the former without hesitation. Her timing proved fortuitous, as Asuma's Team 10 made their way through the doors of the mission hall not a second later. Unlike her team, disheveled and dirty from exercise and sparring, his genin looked like they had just spent the day lying around talking and playing shogi. If Asuma deals with the Nara kid like he dealt with the kid's father, Kurenai thought, they probably had. Kurenai gathered her genin and led them out the door quickly, giving the bearded Jounin an evil smirk as she passed. The two had graduated in the same academy class, and Kurenai remembered quite well how much Asuma hated the Tora retrieval mission as a genin. The original Tora had died some years back, but if the reaction of last year's Jounin instructors were any indication, the daughter was just as bad as the mother. Kurenai led her team to the edge of town where herbalist Ninamai lived, stopping by a public fountain so they could quickly wash up from the day's exertions. Once there, they were met by an old woman with ash-gray hair and a bun, an apron tied around her waist, and smelling strongly of medicine. Herbalist Ninamai looked the team over, giving Naruto a startled second glance, then stepped aside to let them in her house without comment. Within a few minutes she had explained how to sort and package the various herbal mixes before handing Kurenai a list of matched mixes and delivery locations and leaving for the forest with basket in hand to collect herbs for the next few days' orders. Seeing the opportunity to talk to each genin on her team privately, Kurenai suggested that two of them handle deliveries while the third stayed with her. She sent Naruto and Sakura out first on separate delivery routes, leaving Shino alone with her. Of her three students, Shino was the most balanced in terms of abilities. What he needed was simply more interaction with the others to develop a bond of camaraderie, so she decided to probe his opinion of his teammates. "So Shino," Kurenai began casually as she wrapped another bundle of herbs, "what do you think of your team so far?" The bug user's hands paused as he gathered his thoughts. Kurenai waited patiently. The Aburame were known for speaking very deliberately, and prodding Shino before he was ready with a response would not serve a useful purpose. At first, I was concerned with our combat capabilities as a team. Team 10 has Choji and the dynamic of their clan abilities, while Team 7 has two of the top-ranked fighters from our class plus a Jyuiken user. By academy rankings, I'm the best at taijutsu in the team, and though I have confidence in my abilities, I'm not a close combat specialist. Kurenai nodded, waiting for Shino to continue. The Aburame were also quite analytical, and she had expected Shino to note the team's weakness in combat, at least according to academy records. After watching Naruto spar and facing off against him myself, I have come to the conclusion that my concerns were unfounded. He might be near Uchiha Sasuke or Inuzuka Kiba's level of fighting ability. With Naruto as our close combat specialist and some more training, I feel that Team 8 has enough capability to overcome any genin-level combat situations. How do you feel about Sakura then? The only sign of Shino's discomfort with the question was a quick poke of his finger to adjust his sunglasses. Sakura is very intelligent and has exceptional chakra control, but is a poor fighter. At present she is a negligible part of the team's combat capabilities, though that may change with more training. I suspect that she was put on this team so that she could specialize in order to take advantage of her chakra control. That was an option Kurenai had considered as well. Like most users, she was not nearly as good at close combat as the specialists like Asuma or Mito Gai. Genjutsu specialists typically stayed at range, striking under cover of A and retreating as soon as the advantage of surprise was lost. Fighting this way, Sakura would be able to sidestep some of her problems. But in order to be effective, the pink-haired girl would need to improve her thrown weapon skills considerably, as specialists needed to take advantage of any opening accurately and instantaneously. The two let the rest of the time pass in silence until Naruto and Sakura returned from their delivery runs. This time Kurenai had Sakura stay behind to give the girl a break, while the boys would each take 2 back-to-back delivery shifts. Kurenai chose her angle of approach as she ushered the boys out with their packages and routes. She had already pointed out Sakura's shortcomings in taijutsu and physical conditioning, so now it was time to look at the girl's motivation. "Sakura, where do you see yourself going, as a kunoichi, skill-wise?" "Sensei?" the girl asked uncertainty. "Do you see yourself, for example, specializing in any particular field?" "Well, I think I might be interested in learning medical ninjutsu." That answer surprised Kurenai. Medic nins needed greater chakra control than even specialists. Even the most talented medic nins did not develop that level of control until mid-chunin level, and most jounin of other specializations never managed it at all. Because of that, academy lessons only focused on basic first aid practices such as bandaging and splinting, and never touched on even the basic theories of medical ninjutsu. That's an interesting choice, Sakura. To be honest, I've never seen a fresh genin with a level of chakra control like yours. Even most jounin don't have quite the level of control required to be a medic nins, but with enough practice I could easily see you getting there in the near future. The pink-haired girl beamed at the compliment. Kurenai decided then that she would make chakra control exercises a priority during team training, starting with tree walking tomorrow. It would help Sakura get to medic nin level faster, but Naruto also sorely needed more control as well. Kurenai spent the rest of their time together asking more innocuous questions. She gently probed about Sakura's home life and childhood, masking it with idle girl chatter that Kurenai knew from her own experience would set most girls at Sakura's age at ease. She could infer a great deal about some of the other rookie genin based on shared clan characteristics, and she had learned quite a bit about Naruto's past from the file the Hokage had given her. But with Sakura coming from a civilian background, Kurenai didn't know much about the girl beyond her academic records and interactions with teammates over the past 2 days. Once the boys returned, Kurenai sent Shino and Sakura out with the last load of deliveries for the day, while she sent Naruto to prepare the rest of Herbalist Ninami's collected herbs for tomorrow's deliveries. The months he spent hospitalized or in detention had effectively taken away an entire year from him at an age where most kids started forming serious bonds of friendship with their peers, and that was on top of the social isolation he suffered as the Kyuubi's container. The blonde had all the determination in the world, she had no doubt of that. But that determination had lost its focus after he had fulfilled his promise to the Hokage. She still remembered how he had floundered for a goal during his self-introduction. What Naruto needed now was a defined role to play within the team, something only he could do. Something he could focus on again. "Naruto, what do you see your role in the team as?" "What do you mean, sensei? I'm supposed to complete missions with my team, aren't I?" "Yes, but that's not what I'm asking. The reason that genin are put on 3-person teams is so their skills can complement each other. For example, Sakura is very intelligent and has the potential to be very good at her medical ninjutsu, but she's not a good close combat fighter. Shino is capable at taijutsu, but his clan's ability with Kakechu makes him more suited for a scouting and support role. So, Naruto replied after a moment's thought, I would be the close combat specialist and teammate, right? Yes, you're already better than Shino in combat, and I expect you to improve with more practice. As a specialist, when we get into combat situations, as a team I'm most effective fighting from range. That means you're the one who's going to be engaging enemies up close. Every attack that you can draw onto yourself is one that isn't aimed at your teammates. If an enemy manages to get past you in close combat, Shino or Sakura would stand less of a chance than you. I'm not asking you to sacrifice yourself for your team. What I am saying though is that, in a very real way, your teammates' lives will depend on your ability to protect them. In the future I may be asking more of you in terms of training than I might your teammates, more than you might think is fair. But in order for this team to have the best chance of surviving dangerous missions, you need to be as prepared as you can possibly be. Do you understand what I'm saying? Naruto nodded somberly. He had worked at a frenetic pace to improve his own skills so he could fulfill his promise to graduate from the academy, but he had not until now considered what role he would play in a team. Kurenai smiled at him and decided to change the flow of the conversation to lift his mood. That's not the only role you can play in this team though. Think back to our first day as a team when you were planning for my test. What did you do then? Planning for the test? I guess I suggested the basic idea for the plan we eventually used. You actually suggested more than a dozen different plans. Shino and Sakura did their part in pointing out flaws or refining ideas, but the original ideas mostly came from you. That kind of quick adaptability and improvisation is very valuable for a shinobi, even if some of your ideas were. Kurenai trailed off. She couldn't think of a word that meant equal parts inspired, bizarre, and unethical, so she settled for an indistinct hand gesture. Well, I just came at the problem like I would a prank. It's not like that kind of thing would help in a fight. Naruto, you're a ninja now, Kurenai said with some emphasis. The academy concentrates on fighting skills because it's the easiest to teach at your age and the most immediately useful. But being a ninja isn't about fighting all the time, that's what thugs do. The most skilled ninja are the ones who manage to get in, complete their mission, and get out without anyone else even noticing. Your ability to come up with ideas makes it possible to approach your mission target in ways that its defenders may not even have thought to protect against. If you can do that, it doesn't matter how strong their defenses are because you've just completely bypassed them. Don't sell yourself short when it comes to fighting either, because that kind of thinking did help you in fighting Mizuki. When it's just taijutsu or fights are fast and instinctive. But when you add in ninjutsu, combat becomes a lot more mental and tactical, like a game of shogi. There have been many instances of weaker fighters winning because they used unexpected strategies. Naruto nodded slowly, lost in thought, as his hands worked on herbs automatically. Kurenai allowed the conversation to lapse, working on her own stack of herbs in silence for a few minutes before she noticed Naruto's features shift slightly. Sensei, I might have an idea, Naruto said, some uncertainty audible in his tone. Yes? You know when I stole that scroll? I told Jiji all about what Mizuki wanted ahead of time, and he told me to go ahead with what the traitor said, but he replaced a scroll with another before I stole it. Kurenai simply nodded. She was used to Naruto's casual way of addressing Konoha's most important and powerful ninja by now, and it was evident the Hokage had a certain fondness for the boy as well. Well, I've got some ideas from that scroll, and… As she listened to Naruto lay out his thoughts, she allowed herself a small smile at the boy's enthusiasm and creativity. She knew just who to bring in to help Naruto. It was simply a matter of getting her to agree. Why me? Why not Heiei, his girlfriend? I asked. He says his style was passed down in his family, and he's not comfortable teaching it to someone he doesn't know. Yuzuki-san's busy with an assignment. She told me she wouldn't be in Konoha regularly until after the start of the Chunin exams. So I ask again, why me? It's not like I run around Konoha with one strap to my back. You're the most logical choice. Out of all the adult shinobi population in Konoha, he only has a positive relationship with the two of us, and the third. We can't just go and ask Hokage-sama to personally train him, and between the two of us, you're the better candidate. Tearing the last dango off its skewer with her teeth, Anko casually flicked her wrist and impaled the now bare stick into a nearby tree. Kurenai had never made secret or disapproval of Anko's dietary preferences, so when the red-eyed Jounin had invited her to a dango lunch the first weekend after academy graduation, Anko had a pretty good idea this wasn't just a social visit. When Kurenai had offered to pay, Anko knew that she was going to be asked to do something she most likely wouldn't want to do. She didn't expect Kurenai's request to be training for Naruto. Having been through Anbu training, she was competent with a long blade, though not nearly to the level of a specialized swordsman like Heiei Jeku. But her twisted relationship with her own mentor, in her younger days, hardly made her an ideal candidate as any sort of teacher for an impressionable young genin. That, and the fact that she was quite openly against the idea of being a teacher, having turned down a number of requests from the Hokage to take up genin teams over the last few years. Across the table from her, Kurenai picked up a stick of dango and nibbled at it. Unlike Anko and her avowed loyalty to her namesake syrup-covered dango, Kurenai had chosen the green tea-flavored type. Anko wrinkled her nose in distaste at her lunch partner's choice. Despite counting tea ceremony as one of her hobbies, Anko had a strange aversion to any green tea-flavored foods. For Kurenai though, who was Anko's opposite in nearly every way including an intense dislike of dango, green tea flavor was one of the only types she would willingly eat. Anko picked up another stick of dango, pointing it at Kurenai and twirling the stick with her fingers to prevent the syrup from dripping. So I'm the most logical choice, from your point of view. But what makes you think I'll actually agree? You like Naruto, I can tell. You see a younger version of yourself in him, Kurenai pointed out. Anko snorted. Not enough to spend my time teaching the kid when I could be taking missions or getting drunk or, doing anything else fun. Looking around quickly to make sure no one was watching, Kurenai turned to Anko and turned on the full power of her puppy eyes look, complete with pouting mouth. In the process of pulling another dango off the stick, Anko choked it down with a cough before glaring at her companion with an audible growl in her throat. Anyone who knew the two would have found the sight bizarre. Many who acquainted with Anko on a casual basis thought her to be borderline sociopathic and possibly insane. In fact, it was an image she had taken some effort to cultivate. She was known to growl at people, but generally, as a prelude to trying to separate their more important internal organs from their bodies. Kurenai on the other hand was widely seen as reserved, even somewhat cold. No one could possibly imagine her giving anyone a puppy dog eyes look under any situation. For the two of them however, it was just part of the pattern of odd back and forth interaction they had established as part of their friendship. Assuming I accept, Anko finally said with a sigh, and I'm not saying I do, what am I working with? You saw him in the Mizuki fight, and you told me you watched him taking practice swings in Anbo lockup. You're his Jounin instructor now, you must have spared him a few times. So tell me, what's your evaluation? He has good instincts with a sword, like you said, Kurenai replied. As far as I know the Mizuki fight was the first time he's had an opponent, sparring or not, and he's already the best fighter on my team. What he needs is someone who knows to make minor corrections and enhancements to his basic techniques and postures and most of all more experienced sparring. You know I don't do light sparring. If I do this, he's going to get roughed up badly. Kurenai knew from first-hand experience that was true. Practice sparring with the trench-coated Jounin wasn't much different from full-scale war. To be honest, it's what he needs. What the team needs, as a whole in fact. The other two Genin teams this year have combat specialist Jounin team leaders, and the other two Genin on my team aren't suited for close combat. He understands that I'm going to make demands on him above and beyond the norm, and you know he has the willpower to see things through once he's made up his mind. Just don't hurt him so badly that he can't walk out of the hospital afterwards, okay? Anko didn't respond, choosing to pull another dango off the stick instead. She really did like Naruto. As Kurenai had said, of Konoha's adult population the only ones who knew the kid in any meaningful way were the two of them and the Hokage himself. She could see in him the same sense of longing that she herself had in her younger days. She could also see just how desperately he worked in order to prove himself to the Hokage. As someone with a fierce loyalty to the Hokage herself, due to his unwavering support of her and shielding her from the repercussions of her former master's actions, that was a quality that Anko could respect. Kurenai saw the indecision in her friend's eyes and played her trump card. If it helps, I can sweeten the pot. If you agree to this, I'll let you help Naruto on another project that he's working on. Anko looked at the mistress as if she'd grown a second head. You're trying to bribe me to help the kid, Anko said carefully, waving her now bare dango stick at the other woman in a swirling pattern, as if to emphasize her point, with an offer of letting me help the kid with something else. Kurenai replied by motioning for Anko to lean closer with her fingers, then moved closer herself and began whispering in Anko's ear. As she listened, Anko's expression changed from a quizzical frown to a smile. By the time Kurenai had finished, a broad grin was plastered on Anko's face, and the indistinct sound that had begun deep in her throat erupted into a series of mad cackles. The outburst attracted the attention of the dango shop's other patrons, and several faces turned to stare at the two female Jounin. Kurenai saw expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension, the latter no doubt wondering whether the trench-coated Jounin had finally snapped. Once Anko finally regained control of herself, she wiped the spittle from her mouth with one hand while flicking the dango stick at the nearby tree with her other. Fine. I'll start teaching the kid on weekends when you don't have team practice. Tell him to find me tomorrow around noon. Kurenai simply smiled in reply. For all her odd tendencies and frightening reputation, Anko was unusually easy to read and manipulated for someone of her rank and experience as a shinobi. That was, provided that you were one of the few people who had managed to penetrate her harsh exterior shell to get to know her well. And Kurenai knew Anko very well. Sarutobi Hiruzen leaned back in his plush leather reclining chair, taking a long puff from his pipe. He sighed as he set aside yet another pile of completed paperwork. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the latest batch of academy students graduated, and he was expecting the outburst any day now. Each year some rookie genin or other always snapped, refusing to do another Torah retrieval or potato digging mission. Once one team had gotten a C rank mission, the others would then demand the same. It was a rite of passage really. There was a prepared speech that was fed to the genin, something or other about D rank missions building teamwork. In truth, D rank missions were just grunt work around the village that needed to be done. They were a way for industrious genin to make a bit of spending money and a way for jounin instructors to examine their team's social interaction in different settings. But for genin trying to improve their shinobi skills, the only one with any real training value was the cat retrieval mission that always seemed to pop up every other day or so. Sarutobi thought back to his own instructor days when his genin team had been the first to get a C rank mission in their graduating class. Surprisingly, it had been Tsunade who had thrown the tantrum. It was after yet another cat retrieval mission, with the hot-headed blonde dragging in a vicious little beast named Kasha by the scruff of its neck. On reflection, he supposed that it really wasn't that surprising. Orochimaru was always the quiet type, and Jiraiya had been too busy ogling the fire daimyo's mistress's ample breasts to complain that day. That one had always been a pervert, even as a preteen. Sarutobi just hadn't noticed it at the time. The rattling of his office's glass windows, accompanied by a low roaring noise, shook Sarutobi out of his reverie. Aged muscles groaned at the unaccustomed demands of speed as he jolted out of his chair, disappearing from his office and reappearing at the top of the Hokage Tower in a shunshin. His eyes scanned around anxiously, looking for any sign of hostile shinobi attacking, until they settled on a plume of smoke rising from deep within the forest to the east. If he remembered right, that was where one of the most isolated training grounds was situated. In fact, it was so far out of the way that only one jounin had reserved it in the last few years. Sarutobi's mind made the connection instantly, and he groaned. If this was what he thought it was, he would soon be faced with a lot more paperwork. He made his way back to the Hokage office, in a slow walk this time, dispatching a pair of chunin to investigate the explosion on the way. It wasn't long after he had settled back in his office and refilled his pipe that the 2 chunin he had dispatched returned, escorting confirmation of his worst fears in the form of Mitarashi Anko, followed closely by Uzumaki Naruto. Both grinning like lunatics. This isn't going to be good, he thought to himself. This isn't going to be good, he said aloud. Hokage-sama, Anko greeted the Hokage respectfully, without losing her grin. It only made her seem more maniacal. Sarutobi put his pipe down and rubbed at his temples. So, what happened? Well, Jiji, Naruto started, you know that scroll. Sarutobi gave a slight nod without looking up, prompting Naruto to continue. He knew exactly which scroll Naruto was referring to and was beginning to regret letting the boy keep it after that night. I wanted to see how big I could make one. Sarutobi really didn't want to know. Whatever the answer was, it would only bring more paperwork. But he was the Hokage, and he had a duty to Konoha. So he mentally squared his shoulders, looked up at Naruto, and asked the question. So how big was it? Well, you know how big my bedroom is? The Hokage nodded uncertainty. That's big. It took a minute for Sarutobi to understand what Naruto had actually said. An exploding tag's explosive force came from nothing more than the creator's chakra, imbued into the ink used in the creation process. In order to use that stored chakra, the ink had to then be painted in specific patterns, creating a stable seal matrix which also needed to be sustained with imbued chakra during the painting process. The balance this created was what allowed tags to be used by even academy students with their limited chakra reserves, as any chakra applied to the tag would destabilize the trigger seal, initiating the burn that would result in the eventual disintegration of the seal matrix containing the explosive chakra. Explosive tags were very costly to make in terms of chakra, and the typical genin who tried to make one would most likely end up in the hospital for chakra exhaustion. They had been popular early in shinobi history, but had gradually fallen by the wayside as new were created that could replace their utility without preparation beforehand and requiring much less chakra for the same level of damage caused. They were still useful in specific situations against ninjas of lesser experience and were one of the ways retired or disabled jounin could earn money. Those jounin stuck to creating tags using established formulas though. By the time a ninja built up enough of a chakra reserve to create tags, they invariably had also acquired enough experience to know that tags weren't useful against skilled opponents. Thus there was little point experimenting beyond the basic designs. And then there was Naruto, with his enormous chakra supply, wild inventiveness, and a seemingly complete lack of caution. You, Sarutobi said slowly, created an explosive tag, the size of your bedroom, took it to training ground 39, and set it off. I actually painted the seal right on the ground. It took me a week just to prepare the ink and 2 days to create the seals. It was a good thing there wasn't any rain last night. I made 8 cascading chains of explosive nodes, all linked to one central trigger node, and altered the fuses so that they would all go off at the same time once the last node of each chain triggered. Naruto's smile seemed to get impossibly wide as he finished. He evidently took a great deal of pride in what he had just done. The Hokage turned next to Anko, who was still grinning madly. "And what was your role in this?" "I just supervised. I made sure the kid didn't blow himself up and that there was no one else in the training area. Naruto did all the work." "How much damage was there?" The smoke plume was visible from the top of the Hokage tower. "All of it, Hokage-sama." "All of what?" "The entire training ground. It's one big crater now. The kid basically poured 9 days worth of his chakra into making this thing." Sarutobi's eyebrow twitched. 39 was one of the smallest training grounds, but it was still a decent-sized plot of land. He could see the paperwork now. Resurfacing, landscaping, replanting. Everything would need to be documented and signed in triplicate. There was also the matter of what to do about the perpetrators. Technically they hadn't done anything wrong, so he couldn't punish them. But it simply didn't seem appropriate to praise them for blowing up an entire training ground. After some thought, Sarutobi settled for the most neutral response he could think of. "Naruto, now that you've conducted your experiment, I hope there won't be a need for any repeats. Training grounds are expensive to rebuild." "Of course not, Gigi. Like I said, I just wanted to test how big I could make one. Besides, even I have enough common sense to know that an explosive tag that takes 9 days to make and can't be moved isn't really useful." Sarutobi could only smile at that. "Very well, Naruto. If there's nothing else, I suppose you two can leave." Anko gave the Hokage a respectful bow, pushing Naruto's head down into a rough bow at the same time before turning and leading him out. The 2 chunin who had escorted them left with them as well. Watching the pair leave his office with a bounce in their steps, the Hokage reflected back to the events of that day. After informing Anko and Ibiki of Mizuki's plot, he had immediately gone to his residence to switch the forbidden scroll out with a replacement. The only scroll Sarutobi had found that matched the forbidden scroll in appearance bore the title "The Art and Theory of Advanced Explosive Tag Design." Once the events of the night finished playing out, Naruto had asked to keep the scroll so he could read more. Sarutobi had agreed, seeing no harm in it at the time and thinking it was just some passing fancy. It wasn't until a week later, when he visited Naruto to see how the boy was coping with being a genin, that he discovered Naruto's new hobby of manufacturing explosives in his apartment. It turned out that some of Naruto's extracurricular reading over the last year had included basic seal theory, giving him the foundation he needed to understand the topics covered in the scroll. The Hokage wondered if he should have just let Naruto steal the actual forbidden scroll instead. As dangerous as some of the in that scroll were, at least there wasn't the possibility of the boy doing something that might end up blowing all of Konoha off the map. Sarutobi refilled and relit his pipe, then leaned back in his chair to take a deep puff. In truth, no matter how much paperwork this caused, he was glad to see Naruto like that again. He had watched the boy grow up, and the grin he had just seen was one he knew very well. Every time Naruto was caught after a particularly spectacular prank, Sarutobi could expect to see the boy in his office wearing that expression. Naruto had become more guarded with his emotions after his brush with death and had stopped his pranks entirely. Today was the first time Sarutobi had seen that grin in 2 years, and it still warmed his heart. Sitting on the branch of a large tree, Kurenai watched from above as her 3 students practiced water walking below her. Sakura had mastered tree climbing on the 3rd day of Teammate's official existence, and Shino soon after. Both had spent more than 2 weeks on water walking now and were exchanging blows at close to normal speed while standing on the surface of the small lake that bordered teammates' training ground. Sparring this way they were nearly evenly matched, as Shino didn't quite have Sakura's level of control and still occasionally had problems with footing. Naruto had only managed to master tree climbing after nearly 2 weeks of effort and was now further down the lake taking slow tentative steps on the water, face scrunched up in complete concentration. Kurenai winced sympathetically as he lost control once again, the surge of chakra from his feet blasting him off the water and sending him tumbling back onto the shore. Naruto jumped back onto his feet, frustration visible on his face. With a curse he stripped off and threw aside his shirt, soaked and dirty from his multiple failures resulting either in being dunked into the water or being hurled back onto the shore. He stalked angrily to the edge of shore, expression full of intent, only to be blasted back even more violently than before on his first step over water. Kurenai dropped off her perch and put a firm hand on his shoulder before he could repeat the process. "Calm down," she chided gently, being angry will just make it harder. "It's just," he gesticulated wildly, "I was doing better in the morning, and now I can't even take more than a couple steps." "You're tired and frustrated, Naruto, that's affecting your control. Close your eyes, calm yourself, and take some deep breaths before you try again." Naruto complied, closing his eyes and trying to breathe deeply. With how angry he had been though, his first few breaths went in and out rapidly, feeling more like violent shudders. Kurenai kept her hand firm on his shoulder, feeling his pulse gradually slow and his breathing became more even as he calmed himself. When she judged that all the tension in his shoulder was gone, she released her grip. "Keep your eyes closed and just walk forward slowly. You've done this enough times to know where the shore ends by now." Naruto took 2 final deep breaths and then began walking forward. 1 foot before the other, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence as the surface under him flattened out. His eye remained closed and he kept his breathing even, moving each foot in the interval between an exhale and the next inhale. Kurenai watched as Naruto took nearly 20 steps on water before his control finally slipped and he sank into the lake with a splash. She waited patiently until he had struggled his way back to the shoreline and then offered her hand to pull him the rest of the way out. "That was pretty good. The best you've done today, isn't it?" Kurenai offered. "By 2 steps," Naruto replied, "I guess calming down really helped. Just like how you were this morning, before your repeated failures made you angry. You have a good work ethic, but take this as a lesson that not everything can be overcome by just trying again and again. Sometimes, you have to take a step back and start from the beginning." Naruto simply nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "Good, now get cleaned up and come join the rest of the team. It's about time to break for the day." With that, Kurenai left him for her other 2 students. Waiting until they had broken apart from another exchange, she called out and waved them back to shore. By the time Sakura and Shino had dried off to the best of their ability from their tumbles into the lake during sparring, Naruto had rejoined them, wearing a new outfit with a towel over his shoulder while he wrung his practice clothes dry. After the first day of water walking practice, Naruto had taken to the habit of bringing another set of clothes to team training sessions so he wouldn't have to walk home completely soaked and dirty. Kurenai looked over at her students. In the 3 weeks since they had become her charges, they had started to bond as a team. This was helped in no small part by the lunch gatherings she threw for them every weekend, under the pretense of inviting them to try some new recipe or other. She was also proud of their growth as individuals, both physically and emotionally. Naruto trained as hard as ever, while Shino kept working at his own steady pace. Even Sakura was taking her physical training seriously, and the results were beginning to show in sparring sessions. Furthermore, none of them spoke out when she had mentioned casually during morning practice that Kakashi's Team 7 had gotten a C-rank mission the day before, an extended patrol deployment on Fire Country's northern border. They didn't even complain when, after lunch, Kurenai led them to the Hokage Tower and deliberately chose the Tora mission. Asuma was the one who told her about Kakashi's deployment, as he had been leading his team into the mission hall just as Kakashi was leading him out. She suppressed a snicker when she recalled him describing how the Yamanaka girl on his team had thrown a tantrum at falling behind her Sasuke-kun when Asuma had decided against taking a C-rank mission that day. Kurenai still had some concerns about her team, whether Naruto could really handle his role as the team's primary close combatant, and whether Sakura would be able to react properly the first time she was involved in a life-or-death confrontation. But those were the kind of things that she could evaluate only if her team was under real pressure and not in the context of performing D-rank missions or during team practice. She realized this was what one of the older Jounin instructors meant the night they had all gone out drinking before academy graduation when he said that the first C-rank mission would be one of the two most difficult choices you would have to make as a Jounin instructor. But it was a decision that needed to be made, and she admitted to herself that she had probably already made it in the morning. "I want you three to sort your equipment properly tonight and get plenty of rest," Kurenai declared in her most authoritative tone. Her students looked at her inquisitively. She had never ended a training session with an order like that before. "Meet me outside the Hokage Tower at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Team 8 is going to get its first C-rank mission." Thanks for watching my video. Leave a like if you enjoyed my video and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. If you want the next part of this story, let me know in the comment box. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.